Hello. Good morning, everybody. Good morning. Welcome to Rutherford U3A on the 23rd of September 2022. One or two announcements. The first one is that at our committee meeting a few weeks ago, we decided to look at having more interest groups. And we've got some boards here today that will start circulating. There are 3 boards circulating from the front to the back. And we're asking for people who might be interested in joining a new interest group. And the options are music appreciation, bridge, a Thursday film group, a book group, craft group, a group to go as a group, of course, to the Court Theatre, and one as a group to go to Symphony Orchestra, Christchurch Symphony Orchestra. So have a look at those, and if you're interested, put your name down. It'd be great, and we'll try and get those going. Another quick announcement is that the church has asked that we do not park in the parking places, parking spots outside the office. So there's some that have got names on them for staff for the church. Please don't park there. Alison Waghorn had a choir practice today, and she was very enthusiastic, said it went extremely well. That's great. She also said that she'd love to have some more choristers. So please see Alison or myself, and 9:30 before our meetings on Friday in the chapel. Yeah, so the piano is a good one, and it's a great little group. So Alison asked for more members, and I think that is all, other than the cell phones, please. And I'll ask Joan to introduce our speaker for this morning. Thank you, Joan.
Good morning, everybody. Our speaker this morning is David Murphy from ECAN, and this is the CV he sent to me. After growing up and studying in Christchurch, David Murphy began his career as a VSA, that's Volunteer Service Abroad, assignment in Vietnam. This led to 5 happy years working on national park projects in Vietnam and Cambodia, focused on park management and conservation of threatened species. This was followed by 9 years working in the Threatened Species Limit Unit of Queensland Government before returning to Christchurch to work on Te Waihora Lake Ellesmere program. Now he divides his time between managing the Te Waihora program and managing the partnership programs team at Environment Canterbury that delivers environment restoration programs with Mane Whenua and other partners. David, the floor is yours.
Tēnā koutou. Ko David Murphy tōku ingoa, hei kai mahi ahau ki te konihera tai ao ki Waitaha. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for that introduction, Joan. As you'll know, my name is David Murphy and I work for Environment Canterbury. Today, I have the privilege of talking to you about one of my jobs, which is the Whakaora Te Waihora program. Now, before I launch into it, I thought it's hard to encapsulate everything about Lake Ellesmere Te Waihora in one talk. So just to let you know what to expect, I'll talk a little bit to start about the lake itself, a little bit that you can't talk about the lake without the unique co-governance arrangement around the lake. And then as part of that, then boiling down to the program I manage, the Whakaora Te Waihora program, and to give you a little bit of detail around that, to boil down to a couple of projects, because everyone's interested in detail. And then you can have a real feel of what the work involves. So I'll slowly boil down and focus on one project in particular to give you a flavor of the type of work which goes on. And then at the end, I'll have plenty of time for questions, if that sounds okay. Now, the lovely thing about talking about Te Waihora is apart from the values there, it's all about working with people. And anything in this world is, you can't work in isolation. So you do need to always work with others and work with other people's knowledge and disciplines. So to start off with Te Waihora, Lake Ellesmere, I'm sure many of you will know where it is. For those who are perhaps not as familiar, it's, you can see it there, the southeast corner, south of Christchurch, and a lot of people will glimpse it as they drive to Akaroa along the highway there. You'll have a bit of a glimpse. Now, at any one time, it's New Zealand's 4th or 5th largest lake, depending on how it moves. So I think I should point out at this time a little bit of the history around the lake. So its original name was Te Kete Ika a Rakaihotu, which means the fish basket of Rakaihotu, which was one of the Ngaitahu's ancestors. And when the first people who came down, Waitaha, then Ngati Mamoi and Ngaitahu, and I won't go into their story as that's their own story, the lake was a very different creature because before European colonization, it was big. Now the lake you can see is still big. It's still 4th or 5th largest lake in New Zealand. But at the time, its name, Te Waihora, was very accurate, which means the spreading waters. And it would reach out as far as Lincoln. You'd be getting your ankles wet in Lincoln. And right now the lake is usually about, a metre deep in the middle. It's like a big flat pan. But back in the day, it was 4 metres. And it would stretch to the bottom of the Port Hills. And the only way people from particular marae in the north would get to Wairua or Little River was by waka, by canoe, because there was no road around there. So canoes, waka was the only way to travel. So Te Waihora, Lake Ellesmere, it's significant for many different reasons. A while back, or it was before I returned back to Christchurch, there was a judge which was commenting on the level of sediment and nitrates in the lake and said it was dead. And that was an unfair statement because it is anything but dead. Yes, it is in trouble. That is why we're working on restoration. But it is also full of life and of many values. So firstly, it's culturally significant to Ngaitahu as a tribal taonga or treasure and a major mahinga kai. And if you enter the world of Māori and Ngaitahu, the word mahinga kai is so important to values. It means several different things. It means the food which is gathered, also medicine and resources, and the places where you do gather that, and also the protocols or procedures around how you acquire those resources. And it also means just feeding the family, which is what we've all done, which is looking after the ones you love, people in your whānau, your family, being able to provide for people. It's also nationally ecologically significant for its aquatic and wetland ecosystems, and it's home to, on any given day, about 40,000 birds around the lake. And it's also got, because of its size and dynamic habitats, it's got a range of homes and habitats for some very rare and endemic species. I won't get into a lot of detail on that about it, but it's well worth looking at. Actually, I will go back one thing to mention one fascinating bit here. Laser pointer. Let's have a look. So this area here is called Kaitariti Spit. This is where we go here. This is a fascinating place. At the end of the talk, I'll give you our new website. Well worth looking up the web pages there. It is a place full of interesting archaeology. I think the oldest fragment of a Maori cloak in New Zealand was found on Kaiteriti Spit. It's also home to very unique habitats as you go right from the sea on one side into dunes, a very intact dune system, to a very dry type of habitat, and then into the wetland side. And on that spit, there's some very rare species. You think of species like the kakapo or the panda, which are very charismatic. Well, on that spit, there's 2 species of moth, which are found nowhere else in the world. They're very small, and you only find them there. So that's just one example of the unique species. It's also internationally ecologically significant, this whole wetland and lake, because it's one habitat on the East Asian, Australasian flyway. And so in terms of the birding world, that you know about the journey of the godwits. Yes, so there's other birds which do travel this path, which goes right from New Zealand up through the Pacific and on the countries on the eastern side of Asia up to Siberia, and Te Waihora is an important habitat there. And it's also economically significant. There is a very active fisheries, and Ngāi Tahu hold the quota there, and the quota is allotted out to several commercial fisheries. And I think about any given year, it's about 100 tonne of eel, tuna, which is taken out from the lake and goes to export markets. So it's got a very active farming system in the catchment. So before co-governance, has been lake degradation, there's been rapid farming, it's a very productive catchment. But there's also many individuals and organisations, including Runanga, the Māori homes and communities, and councils doing good work. There has been a treaty settlement in the late 90s. But there was never any formal relationship between Ngāi Tahu and Environment Canterbury. And over 10 years ago, the relationship wasn't so good. So why co-governance? Now, co-governance has suddenly become a popular topic in New Zealand of late, and there's a little bit of hesitation around it in some quarters. But let me tell you, it's been happening in Canterbury for over 10 years, and it's been very natural, and it's been very productive. And it all started with some of the fine people in this photo, who I had the luxury to work with when I first arrived. So in the early days when we had, go back about 10 years, there was commissioners appointed to manage Environment Canterbury. And there was a conversation between the head commissioner, Dame Margaret Baisley, who's there at the front, who's a fantastic leader. She's greeting the former Kaiwhakahaere, or tribal chief of Ngāi Tahu, Ta Mark Solomon, and both two amazing people to be in the room with, such leaders, got such mana and standing. And they were talking to each other to say, our organisations, we don't have a great history so far of working together. How could we improve that? And so there was a conversation between Ngāi Tahu leaders and ECAN commissioners on how could they work together. The gentleman in the back, David Cagle, former MP, he was one of our commissioners, said, well, ECAN has got a consent to open the lake, to drain it at certain times. The lake is now owned by Ngāi Tahu in the treaty settlement. Why don't we work together there on having a joint consent? And so began co-governance. So they began a relationship to not only manage the lake, but to restore the Māori of the lake. Māori is a term meaning the life spirit, almost the spirituality of the lake. Key dates. In 2011, that relationship was initiated. Then in 2012, this is where the photos are from, there was a co-governance agreement signed between Ngāi Tahu and Environment Canterbury, and with the government there's a former Minister Smith in the background, and that relationship has grown, that co-governance relationship. So in 2014, Selwyn District Council came on board. 2016, Christchurch City Council came on board, and 2019, the Department of Conservation came on board. So on one side, we always have 5 co-governors from the iwi, Ngāi Tahu, and we have 5 co-governors representing the Crown, representing these different agencies. So the vision of co-governance They are very high level, and they think of the long landscape, and they want to see a restored and rejuvenate the Maori, the life force and ecosystem of Te Waihora, the lake and its catchment. And they have said it's taken about 100 years for the lake to get to where it is now. They've said about 50 years, about 2 generations, to restore some of those values. So this is just a little snapshot of the cover of the co-governance agreement between those organizations. And they have a shared responsibility to provide successful leadership and stewardship for Te Waihora and the catchment. And they govern the program which I manage. It's an operational program to deliver works to achieve that vision. So this is just a wee snapshot of how co-governors think. They're looking at the higher level, the vision, commitment, and the way forward as well. So, I should also mention, before I talk about the operational program I manage, there's one important bit of operational work. I made a mention that ECAN manages the lake level. Now, that goes... That takes a step back even further. I was having a conversation with Joan just coming in, and as I was mentioning, before people arrived on this island, the lake was huge, and it gets bigger. It's like a living creature. It gets bigger and bigger with the water flowing in from the different rivers, and it gets so big that, if we're talking hundreds, thousands of years ago, that it would get too much pressure and then blow out. So this is a vision looking northwards along Kaiteriti Spit to Banks Peninsula and Birdlings Flat at the end. So the lake would get so big then in those days, when it was over 4 meters, it would just blow out and drain, and then eventually, with the southerlies, the hole blocks up and the lake grows up again. When the first Maori came down here, they just saw the perfect food basket, te kete ika. So there was communities there who could easily feed their families and look after their kids. So they would also saw the benefit, though, of creating fish passage. So along the stretch, they would dig with baskets channels to get the tuna, the eels running, and an easy way to catch. When we had the first European colonists coming into New Zealand, they brought the farming systems they knew, and they wanted more farming land. So the lake started to be artificially opened a few times a year, so the lake level is kept low, and you could have expanded farming land towards the now lower shore of the lake. And this is what ECAN manages, but it's unique because this is co-management. I shouldn't say ECAN manages. This is Ngāi Tahu and Environment Canterbury managing. So this is how they make a decision, and this is where co-governance and co-management work together. They have certain thresholds where the lake is getting higher, and different interest groups have different interests in the lake. There's the neighbouring farmers who don't want land flooded because that's pasture land. And there's also DOC and other groups who have got looking after certain values. So once a certain threshold of lake level is passed, there is quick consultation with all the groups. And then once everyone's happy with the decision, Environment Canterbury and Ngāi Tahu both make a joint decision to open the lake. And that's when we get some heavy diggers out there, and some of those people who drive it are very experienced, and they work on creating a channel, and you can see the channel has just been formed there, and they are trying to create a channel as the water pushes the gravel to the edge. And there's one very brave digger driver who at the end, he really experienced. He is sort of closer to the ocean there, and he is pushing the last bit of gravel over, because then there's a drop into the Pacific. And so, then he backs out, because then you're getting enough water force pushing it out, and you're having the waters coming out into the Pacific, and the waters of the lake dropping. It closes naturally. There's no way to close it, but it closes with a good southerly. So sometimes after a lot of work, the next day there's a southerly, and then they have to be back out there on Monday. So the Te Waihora program, this is where I spend a lot of my time. So it's an operational program to restore Te Waihora Lake Ellesmere to the vision of the co-governors. And it's comprised of multiple projects. Every year we do about 10 projects, which cover research, biodiversity, engineering, and it's largely working in partnership with other stakeholders. We do very little project management ourselves. We find good people to do work with, and then we work with them. So some of the aims of the program is to accelerate the restoration of the ecosystem health, to restore and enhance cultural sites, Mahinga Kai, to protect and restore wetlands and riparian river habitats, and the indigenous vegetation and wildlife, to improve lake and catchment management practices, and to establish robust monitoring investigations. Now, how we work with others is very important. On the program, we find good partners to lead projects. But also, the program and co-governance is how you do work with other people. So sometimes we think of ourselves as just being a piece of a much bigger jigsaw in the catchment and the lake, and this is just a crude attempt to put part of that jigsaw together, but there's many players. There's farmers, there's Central Plains Water Scheme, there's universities, Lincoln and Canterbury, there's the co-governance group, there's the iwi, there is territorial authorities like Selwyn District Council, and it's how we all play a part together and work together around the lake. And being aware of each other is very important. So the Te Waihora program, this was a snapshot of our phase one. We had an initial phase of 5 years where there was a large influx of funding, 10.6 million, and it was largely came from the central government, Ministry for the Environment, and also from Environment Canterbury and Te Runanga Ngai Tahu. And the purpose there was to initiate a program and to get a program running and to start to deliver project works. So in the first 5 years, this is a snapshot of the types of projects which happened. We had a fair amount of planting work at the time, riparian planting. I think we planted about 200,000 plants in riparian areas. We had a lot of science because at that early stage it was having questions about, well, what should future management be? And we still have a lot of questions. So there was historic research and ongoing research and monitoring around particular values. We also had a fair bit of extension work, working with farmers, working with schools, and cultural studies, cultural work, and engineering projects. Some of the key projects was rebattering streams, where you had streams which had been created into ditches, very straight walls, and a lot of sediment coming into the water and then flowing into the lake. So we had some good engineering where we had digger drivers. It's called rebattering. It's basically getting a digger to cut back if this was a cross section, your bank to a V, and then planting it. So you have less sediment coming into the waterway. We're now in phase 2. So the phase 2 of the program is building on our previous achievements and working towards that vision for Whakaora Te Waihora. Now, this part of the talk, I will just mention some of our projects which are happening on the ground and get into a little bit more detail and then focus on one of those projects. So some of our projects, this is one I love because this is big bang for your buck. This is called the Weed Strike Force, and it's delivered by the Department of Conservation, and it came about from an Environment Canterbury scientist and a dock ranger working together, realising around the lake we do a lot of control of willows and weeds. Willows dominate habitat, and they don't allow the natural vegetation of the wetlands to build up. So we were paying a fair bit of money, different organisations, to hire contractors to do that work. Now, the two staff members in question came up with a great idea to say, well, in the past, we used to have specialists who did that in the past, but organisations go through different management ideas and models, and sometimes you think it's good to contract work out. They said, well, could we try and get a team together like back in the old days, and their job is just to do willow control. So DOC put up their hand, And what they did was we all put some money together in a pot every year. It's mainly Environment Canterbury funding, but some Department of Conservation funding as well. And DOC are great at running field trip teams. So they have a full-time team, and their job is to just go around the lake and work on areas and control willows and weeds. And they also spend part of the year with DOC and central government funding planting. But regardless of the planting, this has been so successful because around the shore of the lake, there's a natural seed bank in the soil. So planting is wonderful, but it takes a lot of money in maintaining plants. If you, here it's lovely because all you have to do is bomb the willows, and you can see those grey areas are dead and dying willows. And you go under there 6 months later and you're seeing little seedlings popping up. You go back 18 months later and there's native plants just growing up underneath the willows. We haven't had to do any planting. So we've got a great team walking around the lake and doing that control, which is really restoring the lakeside vegetation. Another project is more of a research project. This is led by NIWA. And it was from the observation from some of the Kamatua, the respected elders in the Runanga around the lake, the marae communities, that Te Waihora, there's memories of people who still are alive today, that the lake was not always cloudy. It's halfway, but actually I shouldn't say it's called a lake. It's more correctly a hapua, which is halfway between a lake or lagoon. I mentioned before how it sometimes connects to the sea. So it's never been a clear, pristine alpine lake. We'll set the record straight there. But it did have good water quality clarity back in the day. And it also had a lot of wetland, sort of almost islands of floating vegetation. And that had a huge part to play to hold sediment in the lake, to provide water filtering, and as nursery habitat for fish. And there's some wonderful stories from the folk around the lake from iwi, how traditional fishing, you could see the fish and just club it. And you can't now, as you can see the water quality. So, but those macrophytes, which is another name for water plant, had been lost in the lake. There's some historical evidence that decades ago that they were getting weakened, perhaps with a change in the water quality and level. But the Wahine storm really did it. So when the Wahine storm swept down through New Zealand, it came roaring over Te Waihora, which is a big flat pan, and pushed all those water plants to one end of the lake, and they all rotted and died. And since then, they've never established, because it's a very, very turbulent lake. The winds are so strong. And to get a plant establishing in the lake is challenging. So we've been on a bit of research for years with NIWA of how can you trial planting water plants in the water and getting them to establish. And now we're trying in a naturally sheltered cove with a species which had been lost from the lake, which was discovered recently further up the coast by NIWA scientists. So that's an ongoing bit of research of can you get the water plants back in the lake. This is a project which is just so lovely, which is called the Kids Discovery Plantout. There's a couple of great organisations around Canterbury. One is called Te Ara Kakariki. Now they're the Canterbury Greenway Trust. Now they work with communities, with groups and with landowners on doing planting trees. So if you're ever interested, contact Te Ara Kakariki. They can organise planting days. They also work with another group called Enviro Schools. Staff are based with us at Environment Canterbury who go out to schools and organise education events. So this is where we've provided funding for Te Ara Kakariki and Enviro Schools to organise planting days for local schools at our sites. And it's wonderful because the kids go along, they plant, they also learn about the local fish and insects and birds. There's someone from the marae who comes down and shows them how to weave harakiki flax, and they learn about the Ngāi Tahu values. But the relationship doesn't end there, because after that day, the school will come back on other occasions so the kids can see their plants grow, they can have a connection to the site. This is one of our new projects which I'm very excited about. This is called Whakaora Te Waikikawai, and it's on a stream on the southwest corner of Te Waihora called Te Waikikowai or Waikikowai Stream. It runs right through or right past the Ngāti Moki Marae, which is the home of Te Tamutu Runanga. Now there's 6 runanga which connect with Te Waihora. So 6 have a natural connection. Let's see if I can name them all. Tuahuriri, which is based out near Kaiapoi, Rangiora, Ngāti Wheke or Rāpaki in the harbour, or Nuku, Kokorarata at Port Levy. There is also, Kokorarata, which is based in Port Levy, or Nuku are based in Akaroa, Wairira, which is Little River, and Tamutu, which are based on the shore of the lake. So there are 6 marae there just around in that area of Christchurch who have a connection of history of coming to the lake to collect resources. The one which is right on the lake is the primary relationship which we have, because they're based on the lake. And that's where the marae is, right on the stream which runs into the lake. So we've got a project there which will be over 5 years to restore the stream. And the lovely thing there is anything we do these days has to be in the principles of the Treaty of Waitangi, Te Tiriti, where we're working with iwi to ensure that mana whenua, iwi, the local people, are involved in decision-making and leadership. And on this project, we've got that in co-governance. Up at co-governance here, we've got a couple of mayors and heads of organisations and their counterparts in Ngāi Tahu at a very high level. This is lovely because on the project level, we've got some amazing project managers at this marae who are leading the work, and we work with them on this river restoration. I will now focus on one particular project. The Waikikowai project is just starting off, so I'd love to come back here in 5 years and tell you about how that's running. This is one where we have gone through a lot of the work, and so it's good to tell you a little bit about it, which is called Whakaora Te Ahuriri, or the restoration of Ahuriri Lagoon. So where is Ahuriri Lagoon? It's that circled area right there, if you can see on the map. And first of all, you're thinking that's a strange place for a lagoon, but if you remember the map earlier, it wasn't always dry, that bit. Let's go back in time. Let's go back 150 years, and this is what Ahuriri Lagoon looked like. I was mentioning the lake was much bigger. You'd get your feet wet at Lincoln, and also, where's the little red dot? Up here. This is Taitapu. Taitapu has got a name, the sacred tide. That's where the lake comes up to. Motukarara. Everything's in the name. I love Māori names. They all tell a story. So Motukarara, Lizard Island. It was an island. So Ahuriri Lagoon is circled. It was hugely important for the local iwi because when the lake was high, it was sort of like a little bay. But when the lake dropped and it's connected with the sea and the lake level dropped, Ahuriri still held water. It was a decent lake in itself, but mini lake compared to Te Waihora. So it was a lovely place to come down and gather food and support your family. So that was the historic size of Ahuriri Lagoon. But why restore it? Well, as I was mentioned, it was once a significant mahinga kai. Actually, here's another historic picture. It was so significant, there was actually a fort on the hill on the other side. So if you're driving, if you ever take a Sunday drive and you go from Taitapu to Little River or Akaroa, let's have a look. You'll be, there we go, you'll be on the highway going down here. You'll have the hill on one side and farm on the other. On the hill there was a pa, and then was this body of water, and the other side were mud flats, and it was a lovely place to gather food. So, but as the wetlands were drained for farming, the values of the Ahuriri evaporated. The water disappeared. And over time, the land was handed over to regional authorities to keep the water flowing down the Hallswell Huratini, which had been straightened. That river had been made a very straight line to get the water out. But over time, there was a really strong desire to see the area restored. That call has always come from mana whenua, the local iwi. But there was conversations with the community. So a steering group was formed. And there was a meeting where they put out a call to the community. They said, we're going to be down at the Motukarara Hall. Come along, anyone. And a number of people did, including some of the faces here. So they formed a steering group, and over time they worked together to create a restoration plan for Ahuhi Lagoon. I'll mention 4 of the faces here just because they're absolutely lovely folk and really significant people. But we've got a lot of interests on the local steering group from both Runanga interests and the local farming interests and Environment Canterbury staff as well. So I've got to mention Heroini Banks from Ngāti Wheke from in Lilton Harbour, and also Uncle Les Wanhala from Tamutu, so representing 2 of the significant Runanga on the lake, and also 2 great gentlemen here. Oh, sorry, I should be using this side as well. Here we've got Stuart Miller. Family have been farming there for generations, and Simon Manson, likewise, farming there for generations. So great Kiwi farmers. And we all came together to say, yeah, actually, we want to all restore the wetland. And they were all authors on the plan. So the plan then went to our co-governance group. I don't have all photos of the co-governance group at that time, but one of the great leaders, along with David Cagle and Dame Margaret Baisley, was Donald Couch, who comes from Ngāti Wheke Marae as well. And the co-governance group endorsed the plan and then supported a funding bid for us to get some money to start doing work in the area. So when we were saying, well, we don't have an open checkbook, we can't restore that whole lagoon yet, but what can we do? And we had some science, one of those early science projects, which said, try doing a constructed wetland. I had no idea at the time. I thought, what's a constructed wetland? And it's basically designing a bit of engineering to create how a wetland would function. You bring water in, you curl it round through some plants, it cleans the water, you put out clean water at the side. Lovely, everyone's happy. So I thought, okay, how do we do that? So we got all the group together and we just walked the site. We got experts in, and we eventually settled on this paddock. So this dry area here, this is a paddock of Ecan land. Now, and this is what the Hallswell River, the Huratini, looks like now. At this stretch, it's a very straight cut. So that was created about 100 years ago. Stuart Miller, the farmer up there, so I think his dad or granddad had something to do with that, to dig that. But we said, okay, this paddock we can work with. We can bring water in and create a wetland there. Then we had to get a team together. And this is where I love this kind of work, because you know you're not doing it alone. You build a multidisciplinary team around you of experience, of different backgrounds, and we did that for this project. It's like being in a football team or playing in a band. You have great people around you who all have their own specialities. So we got a designer in who sat down with all of us, all the different interests, to develop a concept and a plan. And we said, well, we want to do 3 big things. We want to improve water quality, improve the Mahinga Kai values for iwi to be able to, in time, gather resources and food there, and we want to improve the biodiversity values. And we want to do it best practice standards. We want to do a Rolls-Royce example, which other people could look at in the catchment around Canterbury. Collaboration and consensus. So this is again where I was mentioning all our lovely diverse thought. So here's an example where we're out here all together looking at that particular paddock. And so there's mana whenua there, we've got neighbouring farmers, consultant staff, officials and co-governors all working together on this. And people, this will sometimes scare people, this slide. You know, if I put on my project management hat, we love this stuff because it shows what the relationship is. So don't worry too much about the detail there. It's basically explaining how you work together as a project where you have the funders off on one side and the community off on one side, and you have a project team with all your different minds working together, and then you always report upwards to co-governors to keep your co-governors informed of what's going on. So we keep nice open communication, and which is really having a good brains trust as well. So this is what the designers came up with, that this is how you could do it. And we thought, yeah, okay, this big blue bit, this was the conceptual wetland and that dry paddock. And I always thought, oh, you'd just bring the water in straight from the river. Where is it over here? And go straight in. And the designer, he came up with a great idea. He said, look, you've got this area here. Can you see this wiggly line here? It's called Murray's Drain, but it's actually the old channel of the river, because a long time ago, the Huratini, the Hallsville, it's a natural river. It winds around. It's a bit wobbly, like all rivers are. We have tended to cut it here to get all that water out as quickly as possible, but this is the old river. And he said we could save a lot of money instead of digging ditches by just connecting it up here and then bringing the water down into the wetland. And I remember the moment when this went up, and we were in this big meeting out at the Lincoln Event Center with all the stakeholders around, and the designer said, how do you put this? And one of our iwi advisors there at the time, it was like a divine moment. He said, oh, that is perfect. Would you believe this? And he overlaid it with the old map 150 years ago. And if you remember earlier back, I had a slide which showed how big Ahuriri was. Well, our engineer had proposed bringing the water down here, and at the start of the blue bubble, that's where you put the cut into a wetland. And right at that area, blue bubble, is where the Huratini flowed, and it naturally opened into the big former wetland. So we were almost restoring part of the geological history of the area. So we settled on that design, and then it came into doing the work. And before we start, we always follow the appropriate tikanga or protocol. And we were led by Tamutu Runanga to have a site blessing. So there's a group of contractors there, and we're led by local Runanga. We've also got some of our co-governors there, like Mayor Sam from Selwyn and Liz Brown from Ngaitahu. And we had the appropriate site blessing before we broke earth. Then came the construction phase. And we had diggers out there. It's interesting. We put up a lot of stuff on the Environment Canterbury website, stuff about planting trees and doing other stuff. It's always the digger videos which gets the most hits. I don't know. Everyone seems to like seeing a tractor or a digger out there doing work. That gets the biggest audience. So and I can understand that. So we had a construction company basically carving out the wetland over a 4-hectare area, and then making those connections, those bits of engineering. Then came a lovely interplay, and this is where it was important to have a diverse project team, because we had to plant the wetland. And this is how the interplay went, the dance. The engineering finished, and then it rained, and it filled up before it was ready to be a wetland. The ground's always just crying to be a wetland anyhow. It doesn't need much help. But then we had to get the plants in so we could sort of fast forward the restoration several years. So what we did was, around the edges, we got one company to install the terrestrial plants all around here. And we had about 52,000 of those in a big ring around. Then we needed to install the aquatic plants. They are a bit delicate. They're very hardy, but their installation is delicate because the soil needs to be damp, but you can't have it too damp, because then everyone gets sort of plugged in the mud when they're planting. So as soon as we had to have our engineering team bring the water down a little bit, enough for the terrestrial plants to be planted, and then staggered a few weeks later, drain it even further, pump it out, pump it out, pump it out, until we got to the ground, which was a little bit damp, but not too dry. And then another team from another company planting 80,000 aquatic plants. And this was going to be the filter of the wetland. And then once that were all filled in, then we could have the official connection, and then the wetland came to life. All along this way, as you can do any of these projects, and they make you feel warm and fuzzy, but do they actually do any bit of blind good? So that's where science is very important. You don't want to tick a box and just do an output. You want to create an outcome. We were wanting to improve water, mahingakai, biodiversity. How do you measure that? So we've got two bits of complementary science going. One is a Mātauranga Māori monitoring program. Mātauranga means knowledge. So Mātauranga Māori monitoring program is when you have representatives from different marae, runanga, come down, share their knowledge, and are part of the monitoring of their values. And that is followed up with, we have ecologists which go out and catch fish to see if that's aligned to the observations being made. And we've also got a water quality program. So those two are running side by side going into the future. We're just in the very early days there to see, as we restore the area, does the water quality improve? Do you get the return of other values as well? What was lovely, there was soon after we got the wetland restored, and I'll show you a photo in a minute, from the Mātauranga Māori monitoring, and here we've got 3 runanga representatives out there sort of recording values. The fish ecologists were then in the completed wetland, and it was lovely because they were finding that's actually a whitebait, inanga, and that's one of the largest pregnant whitebait they ever saw. It was just loaded with eggs, and restoration is amazing. If any of you get into watching David Attenborough these days, he did a wonderful A Life on This Planet book and show on Netflix about 2 years ago. And his thought is, you can preserve what you've got, but those areas of land where we've lost stuff, restoration is so important. So that's one of his messages. Restoration, it takes time though and money. You're much better at just preserving what you've got. That's cheaper to be crude on a crude economic sense. But if you're going to do restoration, you're there for the long game. Planting a forest takes a long time, takes generations. I love the wetland work because it's kind of like overnight stuff. We got the river connected, water flowed in, and it was, there's a wetland, that's great. And within days it was, there's fish, there's insects, there's birds. They just all flood in, and you go there in 2 weeks' time, and it's like, oh, well, it's done. You know, suddenly you've got this area abundant with life. And the nice thing about this wetland is there's a real connection with community. So we've had community, the mana whenua and farmer input into the design and the direction. We've also had mana whenua input into the Mātauranga Māori, as you saw. And one of our school planting sites has been here. So this is an example of Matt from Enviro Schools down with some of the local school kids, bringing them to the site. I think they were having a look at some fish capture there. But the lovely thing is this particular wetland is right against the Little River Rail Trail. So it's very easy to access for if you're walking. We also get cyclists and dog walkers there. So, and alongside working with partners, Te Ara Kakariki have done their own planting sites. So we're now getting, the jigsaw, 2 bits of restoration together. And we've put in some seating as well. So it's very nice to sit down there, go down there with a thermos and sandwiches and enjoy the area. So this was a photo of shortly after it came through. Unfortunately, this was after the water connected, and you can see where those water plants are, the brown areas in the middle. This was about 2 years ago when we've got the connected water through. So that's what the wetland looked like. Now the plants have gone gangbusters and they dominate the site. We're almost too successful there in the planting. It's looking very established. But the good thing is it's a completed wetland. We've got plants growing well and a return of birds and other life. So that's just one example of going down into the detail of one project we're doing. I also want to mention near the end of this talk that this program is not in isolation. We recognize there's so many good organizations and people around the lake doing good work. So under co-governance and working with colleagues, we're convening a forum every quarter called Whakakohanga Kōrero, which just means the nurturing place of conversation. So we get together and we have people there from farming groups and iwi groups and NGO groups and people delivering the work, other work from councils, to say what we're all doing. So we can be a little bit more collaborative at respecting what each other are doing to restore the lake, not just our program. And knowing that I talk about 10 projects a year, there's a lot more than that. And if we're going to restore a lake, like if you're going to do anything big in life, you can't do it in isolation. It's all about how you work together. So this is the starting point to almost be working together in a holistic way around the lake and recognizing, actually, it's a big job, but there's a few of us here doing it. It's achievable. So that's how we're going to go into the future. And just at the end, I'd just like to say, really open to questions, and I'd also like to promote. A few days ago, we launched a new website. Our website was in dire need for an upgrade. So this has been a project in itself, and I encourage all of you to go to that, tewaihora.org. It's a beautiful website, and in it you can dip into about co-governance, what's going on, the values, things to do. There's even some lovely little nuggets in there. Little stories which I've mentioned, hinted at, but lots of other stories. There's even, if you even jump into, there's a lovely history timeline on the lake you can go through. And even it takes you to some footage of the water skiing champs on Te Waihora in 1964 with a great soundtrack, a great 1964 soundtrack, which went on that as well from the archives. So it's a lovely website to just immerse yourself in Te Waihora. But really happy to take any questions at this time. Kia ora. Thank you.
Can you tell us how close to the road it is? Can you see it from the road or the Akaroa Highway? Or can you walk there? Or?
That's a great question. To answer the first part, unfortunately not. You need binoculars, but it is very accessible. We've often had certain events at the Ahuriri wetland, and if you're not wanting to bike the whole trail, the easiest way is there's a place called Neil's Road. So there's a well-known road called Ridge Road, and off that there's an unsealed road called Neil's Road, which runs about 200 metres. And the end of that, you can just park at the side of the road, and there's the Little River Rail Trail. And there's a nice flat part of the trail, which goes about 800 metres to the wetland. So it's easy to drive, park, and then just do the walk, and then it'll take you past the Te Ara Kakariki planting site, which is lovely, which has got a shelter where you can just stop for a while, and then onto the wetland as well. And we've got some information panels there apart from seating as well.
Kia ora, ko Peter Gordon ahau. Ka nui ngā mihi ki a koe mō tō nahi, mō tō kōrero hoki. Thank you for your work that you're doing and also for what you said today. Where do you see Three Waters fitting into this whole business? Is that happy?
Very good. Probably above my pay grade. To be quite frank, there's some amazing minds at Environment Canterbury working in that space. Because in the strategy area, I wish I had my Director of Science, Tim Davey, here, who speaks very eloquently about Three Waters. Three Waters, just from my uneducated view, it seems to be another opportunity to work together in that. And what I understand, from what little I understand, it seems a way of scaling things up so costs are manageable as well. All this work is wonderful, but it's always how you pay for stuff. It's a challenge.
Good morning, I'm Don. Can I just have my ignorance improved? I understand that Lake Ellesmere, Te Hora, was originally the mouth of the Waimakariri River. Is that, what's your understanding?
Oh, you're very well informed, John. Yeah. Jump on the website and go to the history timeline. I should have started with that, to tell the truth, because I think you go back 5,000 years, and the Waimakariri came down. It's swept down its usual path, took a dog's leg, crossed Christchurch, and then went out through Te Waihora. something happened geologically along the way to knock out that dog's leg, and then it went straight to the sea. And then Te Waihora formed or as this hapua, this lake lagoon. You're correct.
Patsy Wardell, is there any connection with Lake Forsyth to Lake Ellesmere? It's a very sad-looking lake, isn't it?
Lake Forsyth, yeah, similar and different. They're not connected hydrologically, so they don't have a water connection, but they do have issues in terms of runoff into the lake from loss of vegetation and what runs into the lake and how you manage water quality and connection to the sea. So they do have that, similarity, but their management is different. Yeah.
Jocelyn Humphreys. You mentioned there's over 40,000 birds on the lake. What are the dominant species of bird life there?
Oh, now you got me. So out of the 40,000, there's a lot of ducks. There's black swans. There is pied stilt. There is grey heron, white-faced grey heron. We do get some of the kotuku, the white heron down there. We do get godwits. You saw pictures of oyster catchers? Yeah, we've got kingfisher. Canada goose as well. Yes, that's right. There's a lot of them. Interestingly, the black swans have become quite a big Mahingakai resource. There's an idea that there's some thought to say that it were brought over, and there's some thought to say they found their own way over. There's a small handful of mute swans, white swans, and there's still, I think, some curious law that they're still under the protection of the monarch as well. But you see a mute swan going over, it's like a Lancaster bomber. They're big, eh? But please jump on the website because it has more complete list of the birds, and every year there's a coordinated bird count where you have a number of volunteers who count the birds at the same time as well. Oh, wrybill. We also get the unique wrybill through there as well. That's another real unique endemic, and they use the lake at times as well. Great question.
I'm going to pinch a couple of questions. The new lagoon, you've got the quality of the water coming in from the Horsell River, and then you've got water leaving the lagoon, presumably. Has there been any measurable improvement in the water quality from coming in to going out?
Good question, and basically too early to tell. We're at a very early stage of the monitoring and the project, so we're really there for the long haul, Tony, to let the wetlands settle and then take some years to measure that to see over time, does the data say anything? So it's a work in progress.
And then the second question is the long-term prospects for the quality of Ellesmere Te Waihora. I know you won't know, but would you like to have a stab at the outcomes, the timeline for the lake?
Yeah, we are doing some good work now. We need to do a lot more, but I believe working together, we can do that. So if you're going to look at outcomes from the lake, healing the restoration of the Maori or the ecosystems, those high-level bits of the strategy and the aims, to do that, we have to work on different fronts. We're doing some work around, and that's why we sort of carve things off into different programs. So we're doing some work on the river restoration and wetlands. We're making inways there. The in-lake work, that will require areas which we don't have the technology. For the water quality coming in, that requires work from other colleagues working with landowners up the catchment, who now all farmers have a farm environmental plan and they have to farm within a particular nutrient limits. So that's a changing face of water management in Canterbury and in New Zealand. And So that's changing, that's improving, but as a colleague of mine will say, that water where we're now getting improvements, it's now, say if you're farming around Colgate or Hororata, that water's now going through, sinking through the ground, through the alluvial plains, down into the water table. It's going to take about 20 years. So already we've got about 20 years of high nitrates, what we call the stuff in the post. So it's going to, that nitrate level in the lake will probably get worse over the next 20 years before you start seeing the improvement. But in the meantime, we'll be working around the lake edge on the other values.
It is. Julian Holderness. I'd be interested to know how far back from the lake you are removing willows. I was out recently on part of the rail trail near the original Horswell before the canal, and I noticed a lot of big old mature willows had gone. Are you still working back, or say towards Taita?
That's a good question. Well, that weed strike force team I mentioned, they are doing such a good job around the lake. They've got almost like a war room with this map of the lake divided into management blocks and where they're focusing control on willows and other weeds. They've almost now got a handle on controlling the main infestations around the lake shore. So now they're planning, earlier than they thought, the inroads up the river. And so that's happening in the months and the next 2-3 years ahead. They'll be going up the river and also working with farmers to say where they've got willows on a particular area farm, allotting the river. So that will be a part of that conversation approach. So they're going to be working up the river. But the team has been such a good management model. We're thinking, well, could we do that elsewhere in Canterbury? Just having a team of 6 to 8 people who solely do this weed control and then move them or hire them out to different areas. But short answer, they're starting that now, and the next couple of years they'll go further up the river.
David, it's my honor and privilege to thank you. First of all, I would like to say how your presentation skills were first class. I think your enthusiasm has rubbed off on all of us.
Oh, thank you.
Secondly, I was very happy to see your enthusiasm again for co-governance. A lot of us have all sorts of ideas about co-governance. Wasn't this brilliant to see how it actually can work? And thirdly, I'm sure I talk for all the members, every time we now go and have our coffee down at Little River, we'll be looking to the right and driving a lot more slowly as we look at all these fantastic projects that you have started and are continuing. And I'd just like to say thank you, thank you. It was a brilliant talk.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you very much. I really appreciate it. Just finally, I'd like to thank my father for presentation skills. He was very up on that when I was young. And also, when you think of co-governance, think about the wonderful opportunity we have in this country. There is a real rich history, which we often, I grew up in Pakeha, New Zealand, we often don't understand or realize this huge, hundreds of years of culture and stories. And also, I remember being on a marae with a colleague of mine, and who is Ngāi Tahu, and he was presenting what I won't say too much about the Ngāi Tahu story, because that's their story, but if you get an opportunity, learn it, make friends, go on a treaty course. And he was talking about the real basis of Ngāi Tahu is the families. It's the 18 marae, the 18 villages which live by the sea. But he said, as an organisation, they've got a certain level of investment as well. And this was a few years ago, and they've got they took a treaty settlement, which was a small amount of what they were entitled to, and Jim Bolger at the time agreed that, both the national government and Ngāi Tahu said, oh, actually, that's probably not what we're entitled to, but we don't want to bankrupt the country. And they have grown that in investment to a certain amount. And as my colleague said, we want to invest going forward. We don't want to put that money overseas. We want to invest in community. We're all about investing in community. So they're wonderful partners to work with, wonderful people who love families and their environment, but also huge opportunities for our councils and our community of having a wonderful partner to work with in co-governance in other areas as well. Kia ora.